Okay, good evening. Good evening and welcome to the Norwalk Common Council Ad Hoc Affordable Housing Committee meeting for today, Wednesday, April 27th, 2022, beginning at 6:05 p.m. And I'd like to start with the roll call. We have present with us Ad Hoc Committee members Nicole Ayers. We have Tom Keegan, Nora Najelski-Eichner, Diana Revolus, and Darlene Young from the committee. Jen McMurray will not be able to join us this evening. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our first meeting on March 29th, which was sent out and also posted online. Do we have a motion to approve the March 29th minutes?
Mr. Chair, I so move that the minutes be approved.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Are there any additions, changes, deletions from the minutes? Okay, hearing or seeing none. All those in favor can either raise their hand or simply verbally state, okay, I see the hands going up, or verbally state aye, and we can move forward from there. Great.
Aye.
Okay, good. So it's unanimous. So the March 29th minutes are approved. Moving on to the next item, which is public participation. Brian, do we have anyone who has dialed in who wishes to speak? I don't see anyone.
Yeah, I don't think anyone else is on the call.
Okay, great. So we'll keep moving forward and close public participation at this point so we can move into item 5, which is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And we have Darren Callahan, our Associate Corporate Counsel, with us to step us through the current draft of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that we're looking to put in place, which will allow funds that are earmarked for affordable housing to go into this non-lapsing account that we could then distribute for the appropriate purposes as it relates to affordable housing. So Darren, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Councilman Burnett. Very pleased to be able to present this ordinance to you. Obviously, again, it's a draft form, but I think it's in pretty good working shape. The ordinance is essentially is broken down into 4 components. The first component is essentially the purpose and definitional section of the ordinance, and citation to the Enabling Act. The second section is what we find in most of our standard ordinances, where there's a committee created, which has jurisdiction and oversight over the purpose of the ordinance, and including both the composition of that committee and the duties and authority of that commission. The third part of the ordinance is what I would call the source of funds portion of the ordinance, how the ordinance operates from a funding standpoint. And the fourth is probably the most relevant, is how the guidelines by which funds that are deposited into a trust account pursuant to the ordinance may be used for purposes of affordable housing. So that's just kind of a lay of the land or the framework of it. And I'll just, if it's okay, but with everyone, I'll just dive into each component part at a little bit more of a ground level. So the purpose of the ordinance is to establish a non-lapsing account. And the city is authorized to do this by ordinance pursuant to its general powers found under Connecticut General Statute 7-148. And that's where all the municipalities' general powers are found. And then from there, throughout the general statutes, powers can be found in other areas of the state's laws. But there's a specific provision in the general powers section of our general statute that deals with non-lapsing accounts. It's 7-148C2K for anyone that's interested in citations. But what it essentially says in a nutshell is that a city can establish by ordinance a non-lapsing account to deposit funds in, and it's very broad. So that's the authority by which you can establish a non-lapsing account. This particular non-lapsing account is being established for purposes of being a repository, a monetary repository for affordable housing funds and affordable housing uses. The ordinance itself defines what affordable housing is, and it mirrors the definition of affordable housing, which can be found in our workforce housing regulations. But in a nutshell, it's basically households with an annual income that do not exceed 60% of the state of Connecticut AMI locally within your area. So in the first section, we have the authority to establish an account as a repository for funds, particularly affordable housing funds, and what those funds can be used for based on the definition of affordable housing. In the next section regarding the composition of the committee.
I'm sorry, Darren, is it possible to share your screen in terms of, because I don't think the members of the ad hoc committee have seen a draft. It might be helpful for them to read along as you're talking. Yeah.
Sure. So I am
Great.
not very tech savvy, so.
No, this is great. I see it on the screen, so
All right.
this way everyone can kind of read through it. So great, thank you.
Okay. All right. So that's just the basic purpose section. And the next section again, is really more the mechanical procedural portion of this, which is the composition of the committee. And effectively, it's a by appointment committee, appointment by mayor or mayoral appointment on a staggered basis, and it's the appointees are from various categories, which were developed through discussions with the planning and zoning department on how to compose this board in a way that would see that these funds were used in the most beneficial way, given the purpose of the ordinance. So you can see, for example, the categories of committee members range from a member of common council to an individual living in Norwalk, currently residing in affordable housing, and anywhere in between. Is a meeting schedule, and then the committee would follow. Again, very generic stuff. And then there's a powers and duties section, which is essentially, in a nutshell, to review applications for use of the trust funds for affordable housing purposes and make recommendations to the common council for those purposes. And secondly, to report on a periodic basis what is done with the funds. So here it'd be on an annual basis. Each January, it would provide a kind of an overall calendar year report of the accomplishments and uses of the funds. The third section, again, is more mechanical in nature, but the most important part of it is that is how this account is funded. And so basically that's set forth in 1-3A, and that basically says that any funds that are received pursuant to the workforce housing regulations as inclusionary zone fees will be directly deposited into that non-lapsing account. And then we broaden the definition to allow also for, and I apologize, I may be working from the older iteration of the ordinance, but it's very close.
Are we allowed to ask questions now, or do we wait?
Sure, anybody, I can take questions and then hop back into the presentation.
Is that okay with you? Greg?
Yes, that is fine. Yes, I can't because he's sharing his screen. I can't see everyone to acknowledge, but if you have a question, please feel free to share it with Darren and the group. Yes, so
Darren, I'm sorry. So if you could just repeat what you just said about the first one, A, and in very simplified terms. So what is this exactly? It's just...
Oh, okay. It's so think of it like a bank account, and the question is, how do funds get into the bank account? And so the funds here get into the account through the collection of what are called inclusionary zone fees that are collected by the Planning and Zoning Department from the application of its workforce housing regulations. So when someone...
Go ahead. You're going to explain what that is. Okay, go ahead.
Well, so like Brian Baker probably could better explain the mechanics of workforce housing regulation, but essentially there are certain fees collected for workforce to fall within workforce housing regulations and the benefits of workforce housing regulations. And those fees that are collected are de facto or required to be deposited to this affordable housing account. And then the Common Council could approve fees from others or funds from other sources as well. So, if it, I mean, it could be anything. It could be, well, I don't want to speculate, but it could have when I add $10,000 a year in local municipal funds to the account, if it so chose, or if it had grant funds that allowed for that use, it could deposit those grant funds in there. But it would be automatic as it relates to the collection of inclusionary zone fees from the workforce housing regulations.
Thank you.
Great. So really the nuts and bolts is in this section 1.4, and basically what this section does is establishes general requirements or boundaries by which an application is submitted and processed, and the general requirements of that of the use of funds. And it conceives of the creation of guidelines that would be adopted by the Common Council, similar to how the Common Council adopted purchasing guidelines. But those guidelines would be created by the Planning and Zoning Department, and that would be the very detailed application process, procedure, and guidelines, and then the mode and manner and means by which affordable housing funds could be used. For example, it might require a contract, the applicant to enter into a contract that they agree to use the funds in the manner approved by the applicant, and the application granted. And if they don't, then the funds are subject to recoupment. But they would create those guidelines, and ultimately they would be approved by the Common Council. And the other, I think, critical component of this is that, other than the procedure to apply for and obtain use of funds for affordable housing, is what can those funds be used for? And so the funds are limited to uses for direct construction costs or hard construction costs related to the construction, rehabilitation, and repair of affordable housing. Again, affordable housing is a defined term, so it's a specific type of housing structure.
Karen, we have a hand up from Darlene.
I see what it is. It was just a word that's missing. Shall be accepted or funds held in the Affordable Housing Trust.
Yeah, I apologize, Darlene. I think I pulled an iteration of this document that was
Somewhere else.
not the last iteration.
Okay.
I know it's very close. So instead of hunting for it during the meeting, I'm just working off this, and I do apologize.
Okay.
But mechanically, it all operates the way I'm discussing it. So again, back to what could the funds be used for? The reason why we put hard cost of construction is so that applications can't be made to use the funds for, say, like surveying or title searches or attorney's fees or architectural design work, or what you call soft costs in the construction process, and with the idea that we want these funds to actually produce affordable housing or rehabilitation of affordable housing in a physical, tangible way.
I'm
sorry.
Karen, we have a hand raised.
Yes.
I may be, you may be explaining this and I might say it early, but is there any verbiage to affordable home ownership and this money towards home ownership in any way, shape, or form in allocations to this account at all? Helping in
As far
affordable
as,
home
like,
ownership programs. I know that you're saying, or even rehab of affordable housing structures for home ownership, condos. Like, is there any verbiage that puts like an equitable stance on home ownership for the community as well? Is it just stapled to affordable housing?
It's really affordable housing creation, whether that's rehab of existing affordable housing or construction, getting new units into the stream of housing.
If I can comment, the affordable housing plan will be the repository to address any activities or initiatives relating to home ownership.
Okay.
The
Thank you.
Affordable Housing Trust Fund, by ordinance as it's set up, will specifically address the items that are showing on the screen: construction, rehabbing, and repairing of affordable housing. So
Yeah.
it's not being designed for home ownership. However, again, the affordable housing plan
Mhm.
will address the home ownership aspect of affordable housing.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification too. Thank you. Because as long as we're not losing that somewhere, I
No,
appreciate it.
we're not. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and an applicant could, in theory, be an individual homeowner that lives in affordable housing that's going to do rehabilitation work. That's a possibility.
true.
It could be an applicant, but it wouldn't necessarily allow someone to say, it wouldn't be financing for becoming a homeowner. That's
Yeah, I understand.
how it was
Thank you.
designed.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification.
No problem. And that's really it. That's that's really the nuts and bolts of what the ordinance is. There's a few more words on the page, but the reality is it's an account that receives funds for a specific purpose, and that purpose is to create affordable housing. And there's a mechanism by which determinations are made of how that fund should be used to create affordable housing. And that mechanism ultimately is an oversight by Affordable Housing Committee and a final sign off by the Common Council.
I guess I just wanted to point out that the ad hoc committee, this current affordable housing ad hoc committee, is not the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee. Those are two separate and distinct committees. So I just wanted to provide that level of clarification. However, once the ordinance is up and running and the committee is established, the ad hoc committee would work in concert with the Affordable Trust Fund Committee in terms of addressing affordable housing issues and items. So there will be a partnership between the ad hoc committee and the trust fund committee. Yes, Nora.
Thank you, Greg. So one issue that had come up a little bit in the ordinance committee that I wanted to bring to this committee was the inclusion of a resident living in affordable housing on the committee, and which I fully support. And in fact, I've wondered if we should, should we have one or two? To Diana's point, should we have a homeowner in affordable housing and a renter in affordable housing? But we had talked about whether there would be any way of designating someone who was on an existing committee or otherwise to designate a defined position, just to cut down on the number of appointees that need to be made. And so I just wanted to bring that issue to this committee because this really, I think, is the right committee in some ways rather than ordinance to think about the composition of this trust fund committee. And so I just wanted to raise that issue to everyone here. Most of the other positions are designated by role rather than an individual appointment. And so I had wondered if there was some way that existing members on the Fair Housing Committee or the Housing Authority Commission or any of the other commissions could potentially be appointed just to, again, have a little bit of streamlining. And if that doesn't seem right, if it seems better that we have the mayor or the council appoint individuals instead, I'm totally open to that too. I just wanted to raise the question to this group.
Nora, may I ask you a question to your question?
Yep, of course.
Councilwoman Najelsi, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You bringing up my point, which you just made me think of something too. Let's say if it was somebody from the community in housing or in a home ownership situation with housing, there are certain committees, like we just started the tenant association. Would a person like from the tenant association, if established, be one of those people who would be like someone you would look at per committee that they're already on type of thing, or not so much?
No, that was exactly the question that I was asking. I agree with you completely.
Okay.
It's like if we have all these existing committees and commissions, and if the whole idea is to sort of be bringing people together, like, do we really need additional appointments, or should we be sort of, making sure that the work is overlapping so that, people are coordinating? I will say, and this is actually a question for all of you, but Greg and Darren in particular, is the housing authority, because I think the housing authority is not affordable housing under this definition. So I wanted to double check whether, to Diana's point, whether the tenants association should be involved in this or not. And that's, again, it's a question. I have no opinion on that. I just really wasn't sure where the definition fell.
Well,
Right, thank you.
I think that's an interesting question. I can check with Adam. I don't know, affordable housing could in theory include housing authority, under the housing authority that affordable housing as defined by this ordinance, could fall within the scope of the affordable housing that the Housing Authority, Norwalk Housing Authority provides Norwalk residents. So I'd have to find out. You think that the 60% MII is probably higher than the majority of the affordable housing that the Housing Authority probably oversees. But they may have some affordable housing that fits within this paradigm. But I think, to your point, it's an interesting question. I think you're going to get, so I used to represent a housing authority, the Trumbull Housing Authority, which is a very small housing authority in comparison to Norwalk, and really doesn't bear much in all in the way of similarities. It's just very, very different in scope and size and in need. But they did have a tenant resident on their board, which is allowed for and required by statute upon application. And that person tends to become, over time, the longer they spend on the board, a really valuable member of that board. And what they bring to the table, because they're directly, it's affecting them the most, I guess is the only way I can put it. So I think whether it's affordable housing, it's 20% AMI or 40% AMI or 60% AMI, it might not make that much of a difference. You're still getting the expertise from folks that are living in affordable housing, but 60% AMI, that's really it's along the lines of your teachers, your firemen, in our area. So you want to bring the person in that's most likely going to be able to say what a good use is of the funds, from a perspective of living in affordable housing. So I think it's an interesting question. I think that a good source for getting more, I guess, more substantive response on that would be Adam Pavilski.
So to Diana's question and Nora's suggestion as well, the Housing Authority had, I'm not sure if they still do it, but they have a home ownership program that they take their residents through, their tenants through, that are in a position to do that, to move on. And so they have access to residents who may be in the process or have completed the process and have now gone from housing to home ownership. So I think that they could provide some good insight on who could be on that committee. That was actually a housing resident. So
Exactly on that point, they do. I talked to Adam about it because I'm always looking towards programs like NACA also and whatever. So there are certain individual that if they meet the criteria, have gone from housing to home ownership. And then we also have started like places like Bruno Court who have reestablished a tenant association. So and that's to double back on Councilwoman Young and Jesse Eichner's question and what I brought up. That's just to help, and the live experience, like you just said, could be very beneficial in the conversation.
So maybe I would say, following up on that, maybe it would be a good thing, Darren, depending on Adam's thoughts and other people's thoughts, but maybe we should try to have two representatives, one who is in a rental property and one who is in a housing property, just to make sure that those perspectives are both represented, particularly if there are particular plans that are worth exploring, for how people have moved from rental to housing. That could be very helpful. So I would be in support of an approach like that.
Yeah, I think that would be, a pretty dynamic way to do it, is to have both point of views, right?
So we would just simply adjust the criteria in terms of the committee makeup to add that additional comment?
Yeah, well, I can update it so that it would be a member of someone who living in renting affordable housing and someone who owns affordable housing. Is that the criteria?
I would say yes to what we were saying.
Yeah, I believe the comment that Nora made was renting and ownership of affordable housing.
Yep, I can just add that um, as a different category. And the question would be, are we going to remove another category? So we'll go back up to our, share my screen again. The
Greg,
question,
this is Tom Keegan. I have a question.
Sure, Tom. Go ahead. Go right ahead.
If I'm hearing correctly, you're going to add 2 positions, or we would like 2 positions. One, a renter of affordable housing, and then the second being an owner of a property that is considered affordable housing. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the recommendation. Currently,
All right. So let me ask you, my question would be, how about a developer such as BLT? Would they in fact be an owner if they have a part of their developments affordable housing? And is that really what we're looking to do?
I think we can draft. So we when I say we, I mean planning and zoning, and I, when we thought about what this should look like, the committee should look like from a composition standpoint, we thought about, well, should a developer be on here? And I think ultimately where we came down on it is, well, but they might want to be an applicant, and then you get into this whole thing about whether there's a conflict of interest and so forth and so on. So I think what we could do, if there's a desire to have someone from the renting perspective and someone from the home ownership perspective that is residing in affordable housing, I think we can tailor those categories to exclude developers, if that's the desire.
And Tom, I appreciate you raising that point. I think it's a very good one, but I'm noting as I'm reading this, Darren has already used the language of a resident living in, which I think would hopefully exclude. And again, I think if the resident is living in the affordable housing, I doubt any of the developers would qualify, since they are presumably not in their own constructions. And if they are, quite frankly, then maybe they would be a very helpful insight.
Yeah, so you
Okay.
could do it as
why we couldn't reach out to, this committee cannot reach out to a developer or developers for advice and counsel, but as far as actually voting or making a recommendation, it would be up to the 5-member committee to do that. So you're typing in 2 Norwalk residents living in affordable housing as a renter and as a owner respectively. That is increasing the committee from 5 to 6.
Yeah, so you either would need to add one more, one odd number, or take one
Is
away.
that 5 to 7 or adding 2? I'm sorry. Because
Currently,
like
it has one council member of the Common Council, 1 commissioner of Planning and Zoning, Board of Appeals, 1 staff employee of the Department of Health and Human Services, 1 board member of the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency, and then it would be, that should be Planning and Zoning Commission. And then it would be two Norwalk residents living in affordable housing. So that would make a total of 6.
7. Oh, no, I could have sworn I just counted 5, and the 2 would make it
1,
7.
One
2,
council member, one
Five of them.
commissioner,
4,
one staff, one board. No, that's 6.
Okay,
Right.
I'm sorry if I'm off on numbers. I
It's kind of
really
weird
thought I
trying
just
to
got
read
it.
it. It looks like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, 1,
it's 6, right?
2.
I believe it's 6.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure
Well-
we just it's an odd number for voting
Wait,
purposes.
huh?
But,
Right.
so we just
No,
added
that
one.
makes
to make it even.
1.
So I guess then the question would be, should it maybe be either someone from the Housing Authority, or again, someone from our existing commissions, our Fair Housing Commission, our Fair Rent Commission? again, because if part of the idea would be to help coordinate, and I don't know, again, this is a question, I'm not making it, I don't have a position, but who else in the city has some overlapping sort of role here that might be good to be coordinated? Is there anyone who falls into that category? Because we do have a number of housing related committees and commissions already.
So do they have to be city related, or could it be someone from like mutual housing, that board? Because they deal with low income housing in the city.
I mean, I would be cautious about sort of setting one particular nonprofit into the ordinance, right? I mean,
Okay.
because also to Greg's point, it does get a little tricky. I feel like if you're voting on this, you can't get the money, right? Because then you have a conflict.
Okay, right.
So
Right.
I think we'd want
Right.
to not include someone who would want to get it.
Say no more. They want to get the money.
Right. Let them
Done.
have the money, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why we didn't include the housing authority, because they were potential applicants.
I see.
Right.
That makes sense, Darren. I totally get that. Yeah.
But they were definitely considered.
Okay.
So
It does get a little
if we
tricky.
can't decide on another, because we don't want a committee of 6, we do want an odd number, right?
Yeah.
So do we have to think of this right now, or do we have some time to come up with someone?
We have time. We have time. We wanted this, the purpose of this was to first, introduce the current draft to the ad hoc committee, spend some time to step through it and get your input, which is great. And we can come back or through emails, gain additional input in terms of if we want to add another entity to the committee, or if there's any thought, well,
Yeah.
there it is. We can,
That's it, 2 council members.
2
and I'm
council
thinking-
members.
I think a
Right.
Republican and Democrat, so can we do that?
Well, I don't know if we want to specifically spell out a
I mean, we
particular
can say 2,
party.
but we know what we.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, in spirit, we can
Right.
look at that, but I don't think we need to put that in the ordinance that it's a Republican. It could be an independent, who knows?
Right, well, whoever, 2. yeah.
So, as long as we say 2 council members, that takes it
Okay.
to 7.
Yeah.
And I think that works. Great.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's either way.
I want to be conscious of the time because we do, I indicated we wanted to finish at 7. And we did invite Brian Bedoli to come on. So we will continue the discussion, but again, we wanted to make sure everyone has seen the draft. And at this point, Darren, I guess we can distribute it to the ad hoc committee members if you think that's appropriate, so they can further digest the information.
Absolutely. I would- I
Okay,
would-
so we'll get that to each committee member.
Great, and if anyone wants to reach out to me individually and discuss any of it, please don't hesitate.
Great. Excellent.
Thank
All
you,
right.
everyone.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. So moving on to the next item, which is Norwalk has received a $6 million state grant for community development around South Norwalk train station. And we have Brian Bedoli on as the Norwalk Redevelopment Executive Director to kind of walk us through this, because there is, in specifically, there's an aspect of this grant that addresses affordable housing. So over to you, Brian.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for inviting me tonight. I think a number of you, we spoke about this as we went through the approval process for the grant match, but we were successful in obtaining a $6 million grant from the State Department of Economic and Community Development to their Community Challenge Grant project, which is really focused on public-private partnerships. But key component of the proposal we put forth had a strong equity piece to it as a result with our work on the South Norwalk TOD study. And that included, as Chairman Burnett mentioned, the inclusion of $1 million for affordable housing rehabilitation. Really wanted to have a focus on equitable transit-oriented development. And although there's a strong strong private component to the project, that you'll all be actually considering more in the next council session in May. There'll be more to come in terms of details on that side of things. But the piece is to allocate $1 million for a rehab. We've identified a few larger scale projects, but we're still working with the state to identify the full scope of requirements and making sure that everything's eligible. So I don't want to get too much of the details right now because some things are still being negotiated with the state. But we'll have more information to come, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have in general with the project. But obviously, affordable housing is a key component of it.
Any questions for Brian as it relates to this great grant and the affordable housing possibility?
So Brian, when do you think you'll hear something from the state or get it finalized from the state?
Yeah, so I just received an email yesterday saying in the next couple of weeks here, we're gonna have a little bit more details in terms of how the grant package and assistance agreement is gonna actually look.
Okay.
Again, a lot of this is dependent upon the project at 1517 Chestnut, which we have a land disposition agreement that's going to be moving through the council process starting on May 5th. And then hopefully to council. So you'll see how the projects kind of all tied together into one, and that'll depend on, how the state assistance agreement takes shape based on, that discussion.
Do you have any even just broad information right now about how affordable housing sort of plays into it, or is that all sort of TBD?
No, I mean, in terms of what we applied for, we're talking about doing, investment in rehabbing structures is ultimately what we're going to be doing. Just depending on the location and the terms of that is what we have to figure out how that looks. The dollar amounts, how, big a project, in the perfect setting, we'll find like one big project that we can really make a big dent in, some of the maintenance needs, because we also have a lot of funding that's coming through the MLK corridor in the same area. So it's really just expanding this program into something a lot bigger than it was before.
Awesome. And is this, Brian, is this related? I feel like you and I talked in the fall or early winter, January, February, about a project around the train station. Is this the same?
Yep.
Okay. I'm just making sure. I was
Yep.
like, I worry sometimes that I'm like, different projects have different names when they're talked about. Okay. That all
Yep.
makes sense to me then. Great. And I think we had talked then about the possibility that some of the rehabbing work could be related to green energy efficiency as well, which would be terrific for people looking to cut down on their utility bills.
Yeah, we'll definitely use that as part of the requirements. So those are the kind of things we were just working through the details. We actually had a good meeting. We've been working through to create some guidelines for our MLK facade investment program. And I think a lot of this is going to mirror that, but we're kind of, the way we pitched it was to really hit those larger scale projects to make a big dent in things that, may not be traditionally possible with the smaller sources of funds that are typically available.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Is SNU on board with that?
This actually wouldn't affect their site. This is really looking at the
No. That's, I'm double backing maybe again on Ms. Eigner's question, Councilwoman, but just in the green sense, if you were doing renovations, have you, how can I say, how on board would SNU that be with that? Because, the South Norwalk area gets provided energy differently than, other parts of Norwalk. So green energy situations may look differently for us because who takes care of our energy and our water, and just wondering if you are thinking about green updates, are they at the table in those conversations? That's all.
Yeah, so SNU was a big part of our South Norwalk TOD study, and part of that was the green infrastructure recommendation. So yeah, we've been having those discussions actively with them, and they've been very supportive in that regard.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. Okay, good.
Great. Any additional questions? So I guess there's more to come in terms of actually how the $1 million grant portion for affordable housing in terms of the requirements. Are there any other affordable housing grants on the horizon, or?
I think just, the MLK corridor, we're really starting to move on that. So, helping the existing affordable house, just existing housing stock in general, and some of that has an affordable component. We're really trying to target our investment criteria around, provision of, in better facilities for people in the lower moderate income thresholds. I mean, that's ultimately our goal.
And does this particular grant have any type of time frame in terms of when the grant money needs to be used? I know there's a matching grant element to it, which was included in the capital budget. But is there a time frame that the money has to be used by a certain time frame, or at least plans created?
Yeah, so we don't have the grant agreement yet, but what we proposed was a 3-year time frame, just because this is going to be happening a lot and concurrent with some of the infrastructure upgrades that we proposed. We may be able to get the affordable housing piece done, sooner, but we just have to make sure we time it out properly with the state. So more to come on that as well, unfortunately, at this time.
Great.
Brian, can I ask sort of a ridiculously big picture question, since we have you here and we're thinking about affordable housing in South Norwalk in particular? So, we're in the process of doing the industrial zone study. We have talked a number of times on the council about our concerns about the abutting of the industrial zones with housing, particularly often low income or affordable housing in South Norwalk. And this would apply along the MLK corridor, but also on Meadow Street. And I'm just wondering, I don't even have exactly a question there so much as have you all had an opportunity to comment on the industrial zone study? Is there sort of thinking going on about, what kinds of industry we need to remove from our residential areas? Just could you comment at all on kind of some of the overlap? And again, long range, I recognize none of this is going to happen fast because people have zoning rights, et cetera, but what's the sort of big picture thinking about kind of trying to clean up some of the industrial exposure for our South Norwalk residents?
Yeah, well, I could probably teach a whole class on that. So it's kind of
I imagine you could. No, that's
a big
kind of
question for me.
yeah.
But that's
I would
Live it,
listen,
so I can
and I
tell
would
you.
listen.
You don't need to teach a class. I
Yeah.
live it every day. Got pictures
Yeah.
to prove it.
Yeah, I
mean,
would listen. I would see there, because that's a great question, please.
It is a great question. No, and in terms of, if we've not issued any formal comments, but we've been involved in that. But that is something that I think, if that's, of the interest of the group for us to focus on, we could definitely tailor some, more meaningful comments than what I could even offer tonight towards that. I think big picture though, I mean, and this is what we talked about in the South Norwalk TOD, and let me preface it first, the industrial study is a much larger study than the redevelopment agency's jurisdiction, right? Although it is South Norwalk and we're Wall West, it's a citywide study, if I do understand it correctly. But from our perspective, I mean, achieving the right balance of land uses in any sort of urban area is of critical importance, and it's derived off of a number of factors, right? The reason why you have these sort of industrial developments coming up over the years is, some of it's market driven, and that's you're dealing with the market from decades past and how that kind of affects your land use patterns. And I think in terms of from on the affordable housing side, it's hard because in Fairfield County, land isn't cheap, and that's what is a big driver of affordable housing. So what the unfortunate part is that you tend to then locate affordable housing where land is cheaper, and that tends to be in more noxious zones. So I think that is a market driven sort of factor. And what can we do as part of this group to kind of balance that factor? Maybe it is using the Affordable Housing Trust Fund or anything to kind of allow for the purchase of land in different areas, or just getting creative with how you make the financials work on that topic. So if I had to give comments, that's kind of where I would head. I don't know if that's, it's a big question, but that's kind of where my head would be at right now with it.
Thank you, Brian, for that, because I appreciate that, because too often we always say that affordable housing has to go into, urban areas that are riddled with all sorts of things that other communities don't have and don't want. And if we're going to be intentional about this, we need to look at other parts of the city and how we can, build affordable housing in other areas, and not just South Norwalk, because the land is cheap, right?
Yeah, and I agree with Darlene. I think one thing to preface, and having worked in affordable housing for a number of years, both here and in California, which land is never cheap.
Right.
You want to also think about where the supportive infrastructure is, though, too, because what you don't want to have happen is, if there are transit dependent populations or things of that nature, you want to make sure that the services are accessible. So it's a really hard balance, and I think it just takes a lot of thought and deliberation and creativity ultimately.
But I just want to, and this is also why I pushed the whole affordable home ownership part. And I don't know if you remember in the beginning when we first talked about it, I was like, well, how are ways that the community in itself can financially benefit in having this in their community? Why? Because if we look at home ownership more and the land that's needed for that, like we would stop giving it and over industrializing it, right? Like you gotta, not only should we be able to bring inclusion outwards, but that should come inwards too. They should be able to, yes, have accessibility, but still have the same peace of mind of where they're living versus if they were in any other part of this town, and have the longevity and generational equity to sustain the same things we're trying to develop in that area. And it needs to be looked at not only with affordable home living outside, but within, and again, in home ownership, because home ownership needs land at the end of the day, so you have to look at your land differently, so that's kind of why I keep pushing it as well.
But Diana, let me say that also what Nora alluded to, talking about zoning is key to all of
And
that.
zoning,
So
and zoning.
as long
is
as you
key.
have zoning that allows, the industry that we have right now in South Norwalk, you're never going to, your investment in that prosperity of home ownership is very limited.
And I could
And
agree.
unless there's some intentional change
Yeah.
in how zoning is done in certain areas, you're always going to have that. And I just say this, and I'm just putting it out there. I've been in the first time home buyers development for 30 years. And what I have right now outside my window is the biggest garbage can that I look at every morning and listen to all weekend long of industrial contractor yards. 5 in a row, 4 in a row.
Yep.
So it's all about those sorts of things, though.
Right.
And Darlene, that raises a really interesting question for me, which again is totally speculative, but we had talked about, and again, without disclosing any locations of any potential school buildings, we had talked about the need to potentially rezone around the school building to protect our students. And we had talked about the fact that even if we did that, that would not force the existing businesses out. So again, totally speculative. This is like a brand new thought, and I don't know how this, but I wonder though about the possibility of even using some of these funds to buy out or incentivize out some of
You said it right the first time, kick out.
Kick out. I was just gonna say that. You said it right the first time. Sorry, keep going.
Right. Like, can we use them potentially to get rid of some of our biggest problems? And, even if we keep that land zone for light industrial, but clean industrial, right? I mean, again, I don't get into it. And I don't know, I'm not taking a position on any of that, but I'm just like, maybe there is an environmental justice component of this that's protecting to, again, Brian's point about rehab or protecting the value of the existing affordable housing. I don't know. I have no idea if that's even possible.
Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities. How can we get the businesses to coexist as good citizens in the community, in the current zoning format, and it comes down to enforcement. It comes down to enhancements to allow them to be good citizens in the area, short of I would say the extreme of using funds to buy them out and move them out of the area, because they do have a value. They do have a value. So I don't think the intent is for us to buy out every business and move them out of Norwalk. Darlene,
I
yes.
would just double back in saying that, and of course they have their value, no minimizing that. But being a resident too, that has to be forced in a rentership that is in between two companies who, that can be very, very taxing to the residents that live here. We also have to, I would just say, and particularly show our residents, they're just as important. I no disrespect to any companies here. I'm a business owner here. I get it, and growing and trying to develop, but our residents as well, and what can happen for them if we did do something, just in speculation, like she said, but the thought of bringing it back to more of a residential and not such an industrial area, and looking at zoning and seeing how that could be changed. Again, there are long running people here. You're part of the community. There's no disrespect to that, but our residents are just as valuable. They're their employee, they're their clientele too, our residents. They go to them too, That's
Absolutely,
all.
absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll take, we're approaching 7 o'clock. We'll take one more comment.
I just want to say to
yes.
Nora's question about the area where the school may go, I think they are proposing to keep that I-1, which is the heaviest industrial regulated area. And so that becomes a really, really difficult issue for us. And I'll tell you, some of the sites that were vacant, that were prior contractor yards. I mean, some of these owners were looking for $5 million. There was a site right behind the kombucha building that would have been perfect for some sort of housing development, but that's now been turned into another contractor yard. So I just put that out there. But I think, Nora, and I think I've said this in the council meeting, as we get closer to this zoning, we start wrapping this up, there's some real concerns. I'm really concerned about that area being considered staying heavily industrial. That just does not make sense. It does not.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I am firmly committed to getting caught up with where the industrial zoning study is. But I do think it's something that we really need to, I'm okay with it staying light industrial. I'm okay with, thinking about, but I'm with you, Darlene. I'm not comfortable with the school being located in an I-1 zone. It just does not make sense to me.
I agree with both of you.
Okay, we're going, I see Nicole has raised her hand. We'll take Nicole as the final comment before we move to wrapping up. Nicole?
Thank you. I have made a conscious choice to listen tonight and to take everything in, because as we all agree, this is a very serious conversation. The only thing that I would like to add is that I wish we had a way, or we could construct either policies, a fund or something to utilize the resources that we already have. And when I say resources that we already have, there's a lot of vacancies in apartments already in the city. And I know in some surrounding towns, they have done initiatives to help first-time renters. They have done initiatives to make sure that our most vulnerable population has sustainable housing, and they have connected with programs like SOAR that makes those people with mental health in disability situations be placed in sustainable housing. And I know that the redevelopment and other departments do a stellar job throughout the city, but I really would encourage this ad hoc committee to kind of look at some, I guess we would call it best practices, or different mechanisms that we can use some of the stock that we have in the city to benefit our most vulnerable residents and more services for their sustainability. So I was taking in everything that was said on this meeting. I was processing it. As we all know, this is a larger problem that we were not going to just fix today. But I did want to just bring that to the table as we conclude this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Thank you for those comments. With that, Brian, thank you for the information on the grant. And as we get more information and more defined guidance, we'll welcome your input and sharing that with the ad hoc committee.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Brian, and looking forward to
Bye.
spending that money. In a good way, of course. In a good way. of course.
Sounds good.
Take care.
Thank you.
I'm not sure what happened to Steve Kleppen. He was supposed to join us to give us an update. Some of it actually was shared last night during the council meeting by Jessica Vonacek as it relates to the ARPA money that is earmarked for affordable housing, of which $120,000 is going to go towards the affordable housing plan. I believe we're in the RFP cycle has closed, so we're now moving to the phase where a committee is being formulated to review the RFPs, the proposals that have come in, so that a selection could be made of the company or entity that will work to create the Norwalk Affordable Housing Plan. So that is the most update that I have at this point, that we're moving towards having a committee which will consist of various entities, including members of the community, to be part of the review team for the RFPs that have come in. So that's the update that I have at this time as it relates to the affordable housing plan. Brian, I don't know if you have any additional information.
No, yeah, Steve sent me in his place. I think he had a conflict tonight. But from what I've been told, you have just as much information as I do.
Okay, good. Great. So with that, we'll no other further items to discuss for tonight. So
You need a
Mo-
motion?
a motion
adjourn?
would be in
Motion
in
to
order.
adjourn?
Motion to adjourn would be in order. Thank you,
Hello?
Diana. So,
Hello?
yes. Hello?
Hello?
Okay, so all those in favor, show by sign of aye.
Aye.
Okay. All those opposed have the same right. I think it's unanimous. Thank you for your time and efforts and great discussion. So much more work to go.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Uh,
Thank you.